The Browns obviously need a wide receiver too. I think we can all agree on that. That is the place where they should be the most aggressive in spending their money this offseason. So with that being said, let's go ahead and with the 5-star rating scale, based on how good they are and how much it would take to get those guys, rate some of the Browns' potential wide receiver targets this offseason. Now, this is a realistic list. You are not going to see Devontae Adams on this list. You're not going to see Stephon Diggs on this list. T. Higgins, you're not going to see him on this list. He's going to get franchise tagged. Who else? Michael Pittman, you're not going to see him on this list. He's going to get franchise tagged. You're not going to see those guys on this list. It'd be a waste of my time because I just don't think it's realistic that the Browns get any of those guys. But the guys that are on this list are guys that I think the Browns could have some space to maneuver and potentially buy into and get. Let's go ahead and start with a guy who I feel should be the Browns' #1 free agent wide receiver target this offseason. He's actually a guy they tried to trade for 2 years back before he got suspended for gambling. Give me a 5-star rating for Calvin Ridley, everybody. I feel that it would be a great addition for us to bring in Calvin Ridley as a #2 wide receiver. I just feel that at his expected price range, it would actually be affordable for the Browns. It's not north of $20 million, but it's in that range of like $15 million, about $17 million that I feel like the Browns would be able to afford. Look, Calvin Ridley, Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, I feel like, man, look, that's just a team of route runners. 3 dudes who are known for route running, man. You really scare teams out of playing man coverage if you bring these 3 dudes on the same team. Obviously, yeah, we know Calvin Ridley's known for his route running and everything, but look, he's a great red zone threat. He's somebody who can be an adequate deep threat, and he's a physical receiver. I feel like Calvin Ridley has a package that really entices you to bring him in as that #2 receiver. And look, 29 right now, he'll be 30 at the very end of 2024, probably stand in that 1 to 2 year deal range, which I feel would be good for him with his age. I feel like he still has some years left, especially because he took 1.5 years off. And look, last year he had 1,000 yards. He was a little rusty to start the year, but for someone that didn't play for 1.5 years and still come back and have 1,000 yards, I think that's crazy. But I feel like he'd be the perfect #2 receiver to Amari. I feel like at this point in his career, Calvin Ridley would be a perfect Z receiver. But he faced and struggled against a lot of man and press man coverage as an X receiver this year, and really was one of the most pressed receivers in the NFL this year as Jacksonville's X receiver. Whenever they did use him more as like a frequent Z receiver and got him more cushion on the line of scrimmage, got him in more pre-snap motion, and really gave him more space to separate with his skill route running, he just seemed to produce more versus man and press man coverage when he was lined up as a Z receiver. And not even just versus man and press man, he was just more productive in general when they used him as the more broad Z receiver. I feel like if you put him in a position where he has lesser #1 or X receiver responsibilities, and that would be the case with the Browns, I feel like if you put him in that position, he'd be an even more productive player. And that's not to even say that you can't put Calvin on an island and line him up as an X receiver sometimes, because let's not forget, he is a very skilled route runner, and you see that on the tape, you see that on the film. That's what he was known for in Atlanta. I feel like as a wide receiver too, he would be in better and easier positions to really flex the route running abilities that he has. And I feel like that's when you'll see Calvin Ridley, like we saw in Jacksonville this year, when he's in that Z position, that's when you'll see him be more efficient, more explosive, and productive versus man coverage. So I just feel that he'd be a great #2 receiver. He doesn't have to be a #1. I think he'll be more productive in a spot where he can just be the Z/#2 receiver. All right, next up here, we got Gabe Davis, everybody. I'm going to give Gabe Davis a 3-star rating. I'm going to just start off with this. Gabe Davis is a very explosive player. When he is on and popping, he's making his money, making those big plays. You saw that with the Bills. He was a great vertical threat for them. And that is just something the Browns have not had next to Amari Cooper ever since Cooper has been here. You want to add another big play player or a guy who is capable of making big plays to this offense. Gabe Davis would be a good addition if you want to address that area of your receiving core. So that's one thing that you have to give props to Gabe Davis for. That's one of the reasons why he's going to get paid this offseason. But look, man, there's a reason for me why he's not a 4 or 5-star rating. And like he's not really one of the top 5 receivers that I want the Browns to get this offseason. And here's why. He's just way too boom or bust, man. He's way too inconsistent. One game, you'll know that Gabe Davis is on the field. He's making big plays. He's a vertical threat. He's all over the field making explosive plays. The next game, Gabe Davis is just non-existent. And this was playing for a Bills team where he was next to Stephon Diggs and getting passes thrown from Josh Allen. He's just way too inconsistent, man. And there's a reason for that. He struggles versus man coverage a lot. When he plays a team that plays primarily zone coverage, that is when you see Gabe Davis go off. But when defenses make Gabe Davis have to earn it when he's manned up and it's man-to-man coverage, he disappears because he's just not a good separator. I think if Gabe Davis was a last resort type of player where all the players you want to perform are gone and he's the guy you have to take, I'd take Gabe Davis. Look, the Browns cannot go into next season with the same receiving core or a similar receiving core. You have to add something. If you were to add Gabe Davis, like I said, you get an explosive, big play, vertical threat. That'd be good for this Browns offense. It'd be an improvement from last year. But I just don't think it's enough of an improvement for me to be satisfied just because he is way too boom or bust. He's way too inconsistent, and he's not the best at getting separation. So I'm going to have Gabe Davis at a 3-star rating. Next up, let me introduce to you Brandon Aiyuk, man. I'm going to give Brandon Aiyuk, who Browns fans have kind of mentioned as a guy who we could possibly get. I'm going to have Brandon Aiyuk at 3.5 stars. Now, look, if it were easier to get Brandon Aiyuk, I'd have Brandon Aiyuk at about maybe 4 or 5 stars. But the Browns, if they want to trade for Brandon Aiyuk, which is looking like Brandon Aiyuk will be traded this offseason, the Browns are going to have to go through some obstacles to get this man. The 49ers want a first-round pick for Brandon Aiyuk. I can assure you that the Browns don't have a first-round pick this year, and I think they'd be hesitant to trade some of their other first-round picks after not having first-round picks for the last 3 years. And look, even if you're not going to trade first-round picks for Brandon Aiyuk, you're still going to have to give up something big. You're probably going to have to give up a package that revolves around Greg Newsome. And although Greg Newsome is a movable piece, that's not the only thing you're giving up. You're probably giving up Greg Newsome and a third and then another player. And even if you're not moving Greg Newsome, then maybe you're moving Wyatt Teller and a second or third round pick and another player. And then on top of that, you have to pay Brandon Aiyuk big wide receiver money because he is an all-pro wide receiver. So look, Brandon Aiyuk is an incredible player. He is one of the best route runners. If you pair Amari Cooper with Brandon Aiyuk, that is separation nation here in Cleveland, Ohio, because you got 2 of the best route runners in the NFL on top of Elijah Moore, who is known for route running. And look, if you were to add Brandon Aiyuk on this team next to Amari Cooper, that's 2 number 1 wideouts on the same team. These are 2 dudes I view as 2 guys who you can choose to be your number 1 wide receivers. Those are guys you can choose with their route running to get the job done, and you will be satisfied. Brandon Aiyuk is an all-pro player. He'd move the needle on this Browns team. He could take over for Amari Cooper when Amari Cooper is gone in a year. But I just think it'd take a lot to get Brandon Aiyuk, and rightfully so because he's an all-pro player. But when you have other options out there at receiver, do you really want to throw all your chips into the middle? I think he'd be great here. It's just you'd have to give up a lot. Next up is a guy who I think the Browns have to take a long and hard look at, everybody. I believe that he'd be available for a really, really good price, and I think it'd be a great high upside move. Let me introduce to you Darnell Mooney, everybody. I got Darnell Mooney at a 4-star rating. I think this would be an excellent move. Now, he would be from an average money per year range of probably $5 million to probably $9 million. He'll probably be in that range. Obviously, that's not a lot of money. Obviously, there's a reason for that. Darnell Mooney has had back-to-back lackluster seasons, 400 yards in each of the last 2 seasons. But there's a reason for that. It's because he hasn't been used right by the Bears offense. He's had an inconsistent quarterback situation over there in Chicago, and they have just not targeted him at an acceptable rate, just knowing who Darnell Mooney is as a player. Ladies and gentlemen, the one time Darnell Mooney was used right in his career with the Bears, the one time he got an adequate amount of targets was the one time as a number 1 receiver that Darnell Mooney had 1,000 yards. The one time he was targeted and used right, he had the best season and a good season in his short career so far. So like I said, Darnell Mooney is a guy who's going to go for a lower price because of what he's done in the past 2 years, and he's got to prove himself. But I think he's a guy who has tons of potential, has showed that if you put him in a good situation, he can be a very productive player. And it's just going to be a very high upside move if the Browns are able to do this. And I think with Darnell Mooney, you're just looking at a guy who would prove himself and would produce more if you would just utilize him more and utilize him the right way. And it's not that hard to do. When it comes to his skill set, man, he's just a guy to be impressed by. He's a good separator because he's a good route runner. He's an adequate deep threat, a guy who can absolutely make really big plays downfield. He's got a nice catch radius, and I think he'd be an excellent number 2 wide receiver next to Amari Cooper. I think he'd be able to produce well. He's a very well-rounded guy, and I think the Browns will be able to get him for a very good price. So if you can end up with either Calvin Ridley or Darnell Mooney this offseason, you will definitely be hearing from me. I will be very excited. Next up at a 3-star rating, I got Marquise Brown, everybody. Now, Marquise Brown is an interesting one because he's a guy who's a really good deep threat. He's really explosive. I think if you feed him the ball, he'd be a really good number 2. He's not necessarily a number 1, but I think he'd be a really nice number 2. And if he'd be put in a good situation offensively, I think you can see some good production out of him. But I think for me, he's just a little too inconsistent sometimes, and that's a problem. That's definitely a problem. But if the Browns were to end up with him, I think it'd be a cool addition. I just don't think he moves the needle all that much. But like I said, if he were like a last resort type player, given his explosiveness, given his solid separation creation, and given that I think he'd be a solid number 2 wide receiver, I think he'd be a solid addition for the Browns. Next up, and last but certainly not least, we got Mike Evans, man. Now look, he's definitely going to hit free agency. Him and the Bucs are struggling to get an extension done. With that being said, he's definitely going to be out on the open market. And if he is, I definitely think he's a guy that the Browns definitely need to reach out to, definitely need to negotiate with. He's obviously a guy that moves the needle. He's a big, tall receiver that the Browns just have not had in a while, probably ever since Josh Gordon. He's just everything the Browns need in a wide receiver. Deep threat, big body receiver, can get separation, pretty nice route runner, and he has experience, Super Bowl experience. He's a guy you can rely on in the playoffs, and I think he'd be a good mentor for Cedric Tillman, given the fact that they have similar archetypes, kind of. And like I said, Mike Evans obviously moves the needle, but the reason he's not a 5-star for me is his age and his price. The dude is going to command somewhere north of maybe $22 million. And for him to be 31 years of age when the season starts, for him to be asking for that kind of money and maybe asking for a 2 to 3 year deal, that's really, really, really risky because you don't know how much time Mike Evans has left. And if you're paying him north of $22 million for the next 2 or 3 years, I don't know if I really like that. So for Mike Evans, it's really just money and age for me. I don't know if the Browns want to pay that much money to a receiver right now. And I don't know if it'd be worth paying him that much money for that many years, given that he is one of the older receivers in the league and he's going to be 31 when the year starts. So everyone, those were the best potential Browns wide receiver targets that I really potentially see them looking at this offseason. You guys tell me what you think of them down in the comment section below. Give your ratings down in the comment section below too. Other than that, this has been Malik Hicks, aka the Ranker of Dogs by the Sword, signing off. Peace out, and I'll see you on the other side. Peace.